There's a kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. You know the one. You wake up and it's already there. A low hum of tension sitting somewhere behind your eyes. A tightness in your chest before the day has even asked anything of you. You haven't checked your phone yet. You haven't spoken to anyone. And yet some part of you is already bracing, already behind, already carrying something you can't quite name. You close your eyes again. But even in the dark, something in you is awake. Scanning, waiting, running through the things you haven't done, haven't fixed, haven't resolved yet. And you think, maybe I just need more sleep. But more sleep doesn't come. Or it does, and you wake up feeling exactly the same. Most people assume the problem is physical. They're not sleeping deeply enough. They need better nutrition, more exercise. And those things matter. They genuinely do. But they don't explain the feeling. Because this kind of tired isn't in your muscles. It's in your mind. And the mind doesn't recover the way the body does. Your body knows how to rest. Given the right conditions, it does it automatically. But the mind has a different relationship with rest. Left to its own patterns, it doesn't stop. It processes, replays, anticipates, judges. Even during sleep, parts of it stay active, working through emotional material, running quiet background programs you never consciously started. This is not a flaw in your design. This is simply what minds do. The problem is that modern life has given it so much to move through and so few real opportunities to discharge that the system never fully unloads. You carry the weight of a conversation from 3 days ago, the anxiety of a decision you haven't made, 100 small, unresolved moments. They don't announce themselves as burdens. They just sit there, quietly accumulating. And eventually, what you're carrying becomes so familiar that you stop noticing it's there. That constant low tension, that becomes normal. That sense of never quite arriving at ease, that becomes your baseline. There is a term in psychology, allostatic load, the cumulative wear on the nervous system caused by chronic stress. Not dramatic stress, not crisis, just the ordinary, relentless accumulation of activation. Small demands that never fully resolve. Emotional residue that never gets processed. Allostatic load is invisible. It doesn't show up on a blood test. What it does is slowly raise your baseline, the level of tension your body treats as normal. And the higher that baseline climbs, the harder it becomes to come down. Even in quiet moments, even on good days, even when nothing is technically wrong. You've probably felt this. The holiday that should have been relaxing, but you felt anxious the whole time. The weekend with nothing on the calendar, and yet you couldn't settle. That restlessness isn't about the holiday or the weekend. It's about a nervous system that has been running at a certain speed for so long that it no longer recognizes slower as safe. Here is something worth sitting with. You did not choose this. You adapted. That is what human beings do. They adapt to their environment with extraordinary precision. If your environment required alertness, you became alert. If it rewarded productivity, you became productive. If it punished stillness, you stopped being still. You learned what your life seemed to require of you, and you delivered it. The mind that never rests is not a broken mind. It is a highly adapted one. But adaptation has a cost. The gradual disappearance of lightness. A background grief for a version of yourself that felt less tight, less guarded, less perpetually on. You didn't become a stressed person. You became adapted to stress. And that distinction matters enormously, because what was learned can be unlearned. The nervous system that learned to stay activated can learn, gradually, gently, what it feels like to come down. That is what this audiobook is about. Not forcing calm, not performing peace, not pretending the weight isn't there, but understanding what created the weight, how the mind holds it, why the body braces, and what, specifically, begins to soften when you stop fighting yourself and start working with the grain of how your psychology actually functions. So if you're listening to this at night, feeling that hum of unresolved tension, you're not strange. You're not failing. You are a person whose mind has been doing its absolute best with what it was given. Somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the patterns, there is a quieter self, one that hasn't gone anywhere. Calm is not waiting for you somewhere else. It's waiting underneath the habits that cover it. And the first step, the only first step, is understanding what those habits are and why they formed in the first place. That is where we begin. Section 2. Why your mind never feels quiet. Close your eyes for a moment. Actually, don't. Keep listening. But notice what happens in the background while you do. Notice the small movements of thought already happening. The flicker of something you need to remember. The quiet evaluation of whether this is worth your time. The micro-assessment of how you're feeling right now, what you have to do later, whether you handled that thing correctly yesterday. You didn't ask for any of that. It arrived on its own. People experience this constant interior movement as a problem, as evidence that something is wrong with them, as proof that they are anxious or distracted or broken in some quiet way. But it is none of those things. It is simply your brain doing exactly what it was built to do. The question is why it never seems to stop. Neuroscientists discovered something surprising when they began studying what the brain does during rest. They expected reduced activity. They expected the brain to quiet down when a person wasn't focused on a task, the way a screen dims when left alone. What they found was almost the opposite. When the brain is not engaged in focused external activity, a specific network becomes more active, not less. This network, the default mode network, lights up during rest, during daydreaming, during the moments between tasks. It is associated with self-referential thinking, with mental time travel, replaying the past, imagining the future, with thinking about other people, their perspectives, their opinions of you. The default mode network is, in many ways, the voice in your head, and it does not have an off switch. This is not a malfunction. In evolutionary terms, this network serves an essential purpose. It helps you learn from experience, prepare for future challenges, navigate complex social environments. It is a remarkably sophisticated system, but it was not designed for the world you are currently living in. Think about the environment in which that system evolved. Long stretches of relative quiet, periods of physical effort followed by genuine rest, threats that were real and present, not abstract and chronic, problems that either resolved or didn't. Now consider what you are actually navigating. Hundreds of notifications each day, each carrying a small implicit demand. A news cycle engineered to produce continuous low-level threat. Social comparison operating against millions, not a village of 150. Work that never fully ends because it travels with you in your pocket. Your default mode network was handed all of this and told to process it. It has been trying ever since. The restlessness you feel when you put your phone down, that is not boredom. That is a system so accustomed to a certain level of input that it experiences the absence of that input as discomfort. The silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like something is missing. This is not weakness. This is withdrawal. Your mind was never designed for this level of stimulation. And the tragedy is that the solution most people reach for, more stimulation, deepens the problem. You feel restless, so you scroll. You feel anxious, so you check. You feel the discomfort of quiet, so you fill it. And each time, you send a signal to the brain that the discomfort of quiet is a problem to be solved rather than a sensation to be tolerated. The threshold rises. The quiet feels louder. There is a concept called habituation, the process by which the nervous system adjusts to repeated stimuli. Eventually, what was once notable becomes background. This is why you stop hearing the hum of an air conditioner after a few minutes. But habituation works in both directions. You can habituate to calm, and it becomes your normal. Or you can habituate to noise, and that becomes your normal. And once noise is your baseline, calm doesn't feel like rest. It feels like something went wrong. Most people listening to this have habituated to noise so thoroughly that they no longer recognize it as noise. It is simply the texture of their inner life. But it is not what thinking has to feel like. Mental quiet is not the absence of thought. This is perhaps the most important misconception to release. When people try to meditate or simply stop for a moment, they expect the mind to go blank. When the thoughts don't disappear, they conclude they're doing it wrong, that they can't be still. That quiet simply isn't available to them. But mental quiet is not a silent mind. It is a different relationship with thought. A quiet mind can observe the movement of its own contents without being pulled entirely into them. It can notice a thought arising, the worry, the replay, the anticipation, without immediately being that thought. Without treating every passing cloud as weather to prepare for. Think about the last time you sat near water. A river, maybe. The water kept moving, it didn't stop. But something in you settled anyway. Not because the movement stopped, because it was allowed. That is closer to what mental quiet actually is. Not stillness, permission. And this is the foundation of everything else in this audiobook. You cannot think your way to calm. You cannot force the default mode network into silence by wanting it to stop. What you can do is understand it. Because understanding changes your relationship with what's happening. When you know why your mind never feels quiet, the noise no longer means what it used to mean. It is no longer evidence of your brokenness. It is no longer something you are failing to fix. It is simply a system doing what it learned to do, in an environment it was never designed for, carrying more than it was built to carry. The noise in your mind is not who you are. It is what you've been living inside of. And those are very different things. Section 3. The overthinking loop and why you can't just stop. There is probably something on your mind right now. Not this. Something else. Something that was already there before you pressed play, before you tried to give yourself this quiet hour. It was waiting for you. Patient. Familiar. The same shape it was yesterday and the day before that. Maybe it's a conversation that didn't go the way you wanted. Maybe it's a decision you haven't made yet. Maybe it's something vaguer, a feeling with no clear object. A low hum of not quite right you can't trace back to a single source. Whatever it is, you've visited it many times. And each time, you've told yourself the same thing. Stop thinking about this. Just let it go. And each time, within minutes, sometimes seconds, you're back, circling the same material, arriving at the same unresolved place. And you wonder what is wrong with you. The answer is nothing. The answer is that you've been trying to solve a psychological problem with a tool that was never designed to solve it. In the 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zygarnik noticed something while sitting in a Viennese cafe. The waiters had an extraordinary ability to remember complex orders, but only until the order was delivered. Once the meal was on the table, the details evaporated. What interested Zygarnik was not the forgetting. It was the remembering. The mind holds open files on unfinished business. It allocates background attention to unresolved things, a quiet monitoring system that keeps checking back, keeps flagging, keeps the item active until closure is reached. This became known as the Zygarnik effect, and it explains, precisely, why you cannot stop thinking about that thing. It is not weakness. It is not obsession. It is your mind doing exactly what it evolved to do, keeping unfinished business in view until it can be resolved. The problem is that many of the things you are circling cannot be resolved through thinking. They are emotional in nature. They require something other than more analysis. And so the loop runs. The file stays open. The obvious response is, fine, I'll just resolve it. Think it through completely, reach a conclusion, let it go. Sometimes that works. For practical problems with practical solutions, thinking is exactly the right tool. But most of what people overthink is not that kind of problem. Most overthinking is emotionally driven. It circles something that created a feeling, shame, fear, grief, uncertainty, and the thinking is not actually analyzing the problem. It is trying to escape the feeling by staying in the head, treating an emotional experience as if it were a puzzle to be solved. And this is precisely why it doesn't work. You cannot think your way out of a feeling. You can describe it, analyze its origins, construct sophisticated narratives about why you feel it. But none of that is the same as processing it. None of that is moving through it. The loop continues not because you aren't thinking hard enough. It continues because thinking is the wrong instrument for the job. There is another layer to this. One of the more counterintuitive findings in psychology. Trying not to think about something makes you think about it more. The psychologist Daniel Wegner demonstrated this clearly. He asked participants to try, actively, not to think about a white bear, just for a few minutes. The white bear appeared in their minds almost constantly. Wegner called this the ironic process theory. When you tell your mind to suppress a thought, the mind has to monitor for that thought in order to suppress it. It keeps checking, is the thought here yet? Which means it keeps activating the very pathway you're trying to quiet. The suppression creates the intrusion. So every time you've lain in the dark telling yourself to stop thinking about something, every time you've pushed and tried to will a thought into silence, You have, without knowing it, been feeding it. Not because you were doing something wrong, because suppression is a fundamentally broken strategy. So what actually works? The research points towards something that feels almost too simple. Acknowledgement, not resolution, not analysis, not a plan, just acknowledgement. Turning toward the thing rather than away from it. Saying, internally, without drama, this is here. I noticed this. I am not going to pretend it isn't. This works because it changes the relationship between you and the thought. Instead of treating it as a threat to be neutralized, you treat it as information to be received. And the moment that shift happens, the loop begins to loosen. Not disappear. Loosen. There is an important distinction between two types of mental responses: fusion and diffusion. Fusion is when you become the thought. It arrives and you are immediately inside it, experiencing it as reality, as truth, as the full weight of the situation. The anxious thought is not a thought. It is the actual threat. Diffusion is the practiced ability to observe the thought from a small distance, to notice it arriving without being pulled entirely into it, to say, not as denial, but as genuine recognition, there is a thought happening, and thoughts are not facts. This does not come naturally. The brain is designed to fuse. Fusion is faster. Treating a threat as absolutely real and responding immediately was more useful, evolutionarily, than pausing to reflect. But you are not navigating a physical landscape anymore. Most of what you are fusing with is not a predator in the grass. It is a memory, a projection, a story about what someone thinks of you, or what might go wrong, or whether you are enough. None of those things require you to run. One more thing worth understanding about the overthinking loop. It is not random. The things you return to, the specific conversations, the particular fears, the recurring self-doubts, they are pointing at something. They are the mind's way of flagging an emotional file that hasn't been properly closed. Not because you are broken, but because something needed more than logic to process it. Needed to be felt, not just understood. Needed space, time, and perhaps a gentleness you didn't give it at the time. The loop is not your enemy. It is a messenger you've been trying to silence instead of hear. The beginning of real relief is not in stopping the loop. It is in understanding what the loop is asking for. Your brain isn't torturing you. It is trying, in the only way it knows how, to protect you. It just needs to be shown a better way. Section 4. What emotional exhaustion actually feels like from the inside. Emotional exhaustion doesn't always look like crying. It doesn't always announce itself dramatically, with a clear moment of collapse you can point to and say, there, that's when it happened. More often, it looks like nothing at all. It looks like going through your day with quiet efficiency, getting things done, responding to messages, showing up where you're supposed to show up, functioning, by every visible measure, completely normally. And yet something is missing, a flatness beneath the activity. A low-grade disconnection running underneath the ordinary movements of your life. You laugh, but the laughter doesn't quite reach you. You make plans, but feel no real anticipation. You sit with people you love and notice, with a faint discomfort, that you feel somehow far away. You are there, but you are not quite there. And the strangest part is that this doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels like Tuesday. You stop questioning it. And that is precisely when emotional exhaustion becomes most dangerous. Not because it is dramatic, but because it becomes invisible. Your emotional reserves function like a bank account. Positive experiences, rest, connection, meaning, these make deposits. Stress, conflict, suppression, relentless demand, these make withdrawals. Most people understand this intuitively. What they underestimate is how quietly the withdrawals accumulate. Because the withdrawals are rarely large. A conversation that required more emotional management than it should have. A night of broken sleep. A day spent performing composure while feeling something entirely different underneath. A week of giving more than you received. Each one, individually, is manageable, but they compound. And the account, slowly and without announcement, approaches zero. You don't feel it happening. You feel it only after. In the inexplicable tearfulness at something trivial, in the disproportionate irritation at a small inconvenience, in the sudden, overwhelming desire to simply disappear for a while. Not dramatically, not forever, just away, somewhere no one needs anything from you. That desire for disappearance is not selfishness. It is the sound of a person giving from an empty account. Emotional exhaustion disguises itself in ways that are easy to misinterpret. It can feel like apathy, a loss of interest in things that used to matter. You look at something that once excited you and feel nothing, not even sadness at the absence of feeling, just flat, gray neutrality. And you wonder if you've simply changed. If this is just what maturity feels like. It isn't. It is a depleted system protecting itself by withdrawing investment from everything that isn't immediately essential. It can feel like irritability, a shortened fuse, a disproportionate reaction to minor frustrations. And you feel ashamed because you know the thing didn't warrant that response, but you had nothing left with which to buffer it. That isn't a character flaw. It is a system running on reserves it no longer has. It can feel like cynicism, a slow withdrawal of optimism, a creeping sense that things won't work out, that effort doesn't really pay off. Not dramatic despair, just a quiet, tired skepticism that settles over everything like dust. That cynicism is not wisdom. It is exhaustion wearing the mask of experience. And perhaps most confusingly, it can feel like numbness. Not sadness, not anxiety, just an absence, a dimming. The emotional equivalent of a room with the lights turned down very low. You can still function, but the vibrancy is gone, and you cannot remember quite when it left. There is a specific exhaustion that doesn't get talked about enough. The exhaustion of managing how you feel in front of other people. Psychologists call this emotional labor. The work of monitoring your own emotional expression, adjusting it for the context, performing composure when you feel chaos, performing fine when you feel anything but. Everyone does this to some degree, but some people do it constantly. Some people have been doing it so long that they no longer notice the effort it requires. The smile arriving before the feeling does. The reassurance dispensed before anyone asks. The personal needs set aside so smoothly and so habitually that it doesn't feel like sacrifice anymore. It just feels like who they are. But it is not who they are. It is what they learned. And the feelings you set aside don't disappear. They go somewhere. They settle into the body as tension, as fatigue, as a low background ache you have learned to carry so well that you mistake it for your natural state. You didn't become cold. You became full. Emotional exhaustion and depression share many surface features. The flatness, the disengagement, the loss of pleasure in things that once mattered. And this similarity matters. If what you're feeling is persistent and deep, speaking to someone who can help you distinguish between them is genuinely worthwhile. But emotional exhaustion, distinct from clinical depression, has a different quality. It is directional. It points back at something. A period of sustained demand, of chronic giving, of emotional suppression. And when the conditions change, when the demand eases, when genuine rest becomes available, there is movement. Something in the system begins to breathe again. The flatness has an edge, and just beyond that edge is feeling. What emotional exhaustion asks of you is not more effort. This is the central misunderstanding. The idea that recovery requires action, that you should push through, build better habits, optimize your rest. But the first thing it asks is far simpler. Recognition. Just see it. Name it. Allow it to be what it actually is, instead of a vague malfunction you're trying to will away. Instead of weakness. Instead of evidence that you aren't coping as well as you should be. You are not failing to cope. You are exhausted. Those are very different things. And the moment you stop treating your exhaustion as a personal failure and start treating it as accurate information, something shifts. Not dramatically, but something in you exhales. Because being finally seen, even by yourself, is its own form of relief. That flat feeling you've been living inside. You probably didn't have a word for it before now. Now you do. And that is the beginning. Section 5. The nervous system nobody explained to you. Your nervous system is running a program right now. You didn't write it. You didn't decide how your body would respond to stress or conflict, or the particular tone of voice someone uses when they're disappointed in you. You didn't choose the way your chest tightens before a difficult conversation, or the way your thoughts accelerate at night when the room goes quiet. These responses arrive before language, before memory, before you had any way to evaluate or question them. You inherited some of them. You absorbed others from the environment you grew up in. You repeated all of them until they became invisible, not behaviors you were doing, but simply the way things were. And no one ever sat down and explained what was actually happening. So let's do that now. The autonomic nervous system operates below conscious control. It governs your threat response, the way your body mobilizes when it perceives danger, and the way it recovers when the danger has passed. It has two primary modes. The sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. When the brain perceives a threat, stress hormones are released. Heart rate increases. Blood moves toward the large muscle groups. Attention narrows. The body prepares, with remarkable speed, to either confront the threat or escape it. The parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. When the threat has passed, this system brings the body back down. Heart rate slows. Breathing deepens. The muscles release. In a healthy nervous system, these two work in balance. Activation when needed. Recovery when the activation is no longer required. A rhythm of engagement and release. The problem is that for many people, this rhythm has been disrupted. The sympathetic system was designed for threats that were acute, present, resolvable through physical action. A real danger that either passed or didn't, but it ended. And when it ended, the body could recover. The threats you are navigating are different, chronic, abstract, unresolvable through physical action. You cannot outrun an overflowing inbox. You cannot fight a difficult relationship into resolution. You cannot sprint away from financial anxiety or freeze your way through a performance review. And yet your nervous system responds to these modern stressors with the same ancient machinery. The sympathetic system activates. The stress hormones arrive. And then there is no action to take. The threat doesn't pass. It is a situation, a worry, a pattern. So the activation has nowhere to go. It just stays. It becomes the background. It becomes baseline. Psychiatrist Dan Siegel developed a concept called the window of tolerance. Imagine a band, a range of activation within which you function well. Inside this window, you can think clearly, feel your emotions without being overwhelmed, respond rather than react. Below the window is hypoarousal, numbness, flatness, shutdown, the emotional dimming we talked about in the last section. This is not calm. This is collapse. Above the window is hyperarousal, anxiety, racing thoughts, the feeling of being too close to the surface, where small things feel large and you can't quite settle. Most people who struggle with chronic stress live at the edges of this window, or outside it, for much of their day, oscillating between too much and not enough, rarely finding the regulated middle. And the further you drift from that window, the harder it becomes to return. Because a dysregulated nervous system begins to treat dysregulation as normal. The body recalibrates upward. Higher tension becomes the default. And when genuine calm becomes available, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like something is wrong. You may have experienced this. A slow morning, a peaceful evening, a rare day without demand. And instead of relaxing into it, you feel a creeping unease, a sense that you've forgotten something, that things feel too still. This is not irrational. This is a nervous system that has coded high activation as the safe state, as normal, as the condition under which things are under control. Calm, paradoxically, can feel like a threat to a system that has never learned to trust it. This matters because it means removing the stressors is often not enough. You can change the circumstances and still carry the activation pattern in your body, still brace in the quiet, still wait for the next thing to go wrong, even when nothing is going wrong. The pattern lives in the nervous system, not just in the situation. And the nervous system has to be taught, slowly, gently, repeatedly, that calm is safe. The nervous system does not respond to commands. You cannot instruct it to relax the way you instruct yourself to complete a task. It responds to signals, specific physiological signals that communicate beneath the level of thought that the threat has passed, that it is safe to come down. Some signals are physical, slow, Deep breathing activates the vagus nerve, the primary pathway of the parasympathetic system. Not because you decided to relax, because you gave the nervous system the signal it needed. Some signals are relational. The nervous system co-regulates. It takes cues from other nervous systems. A calm, present person can literally shift your physiological state. This is why certain people make you feel at ease without doing anything in particular. And some signals are internal. The signal that you will not abandon yourself in difficulty. That when your body says enough, you will listen. Your body has been waiting for permission to exhale. Not someday. Not when things calm down. Not when you've earned it. Now, even while the problems still exist and the demands are still real, your nervous system can begin, right now, to receive a different message. Not because anything has been fixed, because you have finally stopped requiring yourself to stay braced. Notice what your shoulders are doing right now. Notice if your jaw is held. Notice if somewhere in your body, without realizing it, you have been holding something. You don't have to fix it. Just notice. That noticing, that small, honest act of attention, is already a signal. It is already the beginning of the nervous system learning something it may not have been taught before. That you are safe enough to feel what you feel, and that the ground beneath you is more solid than the tension in your body has been telling you. Section 6. What positive psychology actually is. If you have ever been told to think positive, if you have ever been handed a gratitude journal during a genuinely difficult time, if you have ever sat across from someone who responded to your pain with a reminder about mindset, then you already have a relationship with what you think positive psychology is. And it is likely not a warm one. This is understandable, because what gets sold under the banner of positive psychology, the affirmations, the vision boards, the insistence that your thoughts create your reality, has very little to do with what positive psychology actually is. What gets sold is a feeling. What the science offers is something far more honest, far more grounded, and far more useful. And if you have always found the self-help world faintly false, faintly condescending, faintly disconnected from the actual texture of human difficulty, understanding what positive psychology genuinely is may be one of the more relieving things you encounter. Because the real version agrees with you. Positive psychology as a formal discipline was introduced in 1998 by Martin Seligman. His argument was straightforward. Psychology, for most of its history, had focused almost exclusively on pathology, on what goes wrong, on diagnosing dysfunction, treating disorder, reducing suffering. This was essential work, but it was only half the picture. Understanding what breaks the mind tells you something. But understanding what allows the mind to genuinely flourish, to find meaning, build resilience, sustain well-being through difficulty, requires a different set of questions entirely. Positive psychology was not an attempt to replace the study of suffering with the study of happiness. It was an attempt to complete the picture, to ask not only what is wrong, but what is possible, and to answer that question with evidence, not inspiration. The most accessible framework to emerge from this field is something Seligman called PERMA. 5 elements the research identifies as central to genuine psychological well-being. Not happiness exactly, not the absence of difficulty, something more durable than either. Positive emotion, not forced positivity, but genuine emotional experience. Curiosity, gratitude, awe, serenity. The full spectrum of emotions that expand rather than contract your sense of the world. Engagement, the experience of being absorbed in something. What Csikszentmihalyi called flow. The state where challenge and skill are matched. Time distorts. The self-conscious mind quiets. You have felt this. It is not happiness, exactly. It is better than happiness. It is presence. Relationships, not the number of them. The quality of genuine connection. Being known and knowing. Mattering to someone and having someone matter to you. The research here is unambiguous. The quality of your relationships is one of the strongest predictors of psychological well-being available. Not your productivity, not your achievements, your relationships. Meaning, the experience of being part of something larger than yourself. This does not require grand purpose. It can be as quiet as caring deeply for someone or doing work that genuinely serves something real. And accomplishment, not achievement for external validation, but the intrinsic satisfaction of pursuing and reaching goals. The felt sense of doing something well for the sake of the doing. These 5 elements are not a prescription. They are a map, a description of the terrain in which human beings tend to flourish. But here is what matters most, what the pop psychology version almost always misses. Positive psychology does not ask you to feel good. It asks you to be honest. Seligman himself drew a precise distinction between learned optimism and what he called toxic positivity. Learned optimism is not the insistence that things are fine. It is not the suppression of negative emotion. It is not the performance of happiness in the face of genuine hardship. It is the practiced ability to hold difficulty accurately, to see a setback as specific rather than total, temporary rather than permanent, not a verdict on your fundamental worth. Not because this is more comfortable, but because it is more accurate. The catastrophic interpretation, "This always happens to me. This will never change. This proves something irredeemable about who I am," is almost never true. And believing things that are not true is not wisdom. It is suffering in the shape of honesty. Real psychological health includes processing difficulty. It includes grief and anger and fear and uncertainty. The full, honest experience of being human. What it does not include, what the research consistently shows is corrosive to well-being, is the prolonged suppression of that experience, the insistence on being fine, the performance of positivity as a defense against feeling. You were never supposed to think your way happy. You were supposed to feel your way through. There is a concept I want to use in a specific way here. Psychological safety. Not safety as the absence of challenge. Not protection from difficulty. Psychological safety as an internal environment in which your actual experience is allowed to exist, in which you do not have to manage yourself into acceptability before you can be honest about what is happening, in which the full range of your emotional life, including the parts that are inconvenient, uncomfortable, confusing, has somewhere to land. This is the foundation of everything else in this audiobook. Because you cannot calm a mind that is also being required to suppress itself. The regulated, peaceful mind is not one that has learned to perform peace. It is one that has learned to allow what is real, without being defined by it, without being swallowed by it, without needing to resolve it immediately. Just allow it. And then, from that place of honest allowance, begin to work with it. Real well-being is not the absence of hard feelings. It is the ability to move through them without losing yourself, to be affected by life, genuinely, fully, humanly affected, and still return to equilibrium. Not because you forced yourself back, but because you built, slowly and honestly, the internal conditions that make returning possible. Most people were taught that feeling bad means something went wrong. That idea is the problem. Feeling is not the problem. Feeling is the path. And positive psychology, at its best, is simply the science of what it takes to walk it. Section 7. How calm people think differently. There is someone in your life like this. You may not be able to name them immediately, but they exist. Someone who moves through difficulty without being flattened by it. Someone who, when things go wrong, and things do go wrong for them, because they go wrong for everyone, doesn't unravel the way you do. Someone who can sit with uncertainty without needing to resolve it immediately. Who can receive criticism without carrying it for days. You've probably watched this person and felt something complicated. Admiration. And beneath the admiration, something quieter. A wondering, what is it like to be that way? Is it something I could ever learn? Or is it simply who they are? A temperament I missed out on. Here is what the research says. It is not who they are. It is what they practice. Calm is not a personality trait. This is perhaps the single most important reframe in this entire audiobook. Because the belief that some people are simply calm, that equanimity is a fixed characteristic distributed unevenly at birth, is one of the most quietly devastating beliefs a person can hold. If calm is a trait, you either have it or you don't. But if calm is a practice, a set of learned responses that some people have developed consciously or through circumstance over time, then it is available to anyone willing to develop it. The research is clear. Psychological regulation is not a personality type. It is a skill set. And like all skill sets, it can be studied, practiced, and gradually internalized. So what does that skill set actually look like? The first thing calm people do differently is create distance between a thought and a response. Not much distance, just a beat. A small internal space between the stimulus arriving and the reaction beginning. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to found logotherapy, observed that human beings have a capacity that animals do not. The ability to choose, however briefly, how to respond to what happens to them. Not to be unaffected, but to introduce, however slightly, some element of agency between experience and reaction. Calm people have developed this space, not because they feel less. This is crucial. Calm people are not less sensitive or less emotionally alive. What they have developed is not a reduced emotional response. It is a slightly slower one. A beat of awareness before the automatic reaction takes over. A moment in which they can notice, I am feeling this. This is what it feels like. This is the thought that is arising, before being entirely inside it. That beat is everything. Because inside that beat, choice becomes possible. The second thing is cognitive diffusion. Fusion is the state of being fully merged with a thought. It arrives and you are immediately inside it. The self-critical thought is not a mental event. It is an accurate assessment of your worth. The catastrophic thought is not a projection. It is what is actually going to happen. Diffusion is the practiced ability to observe that same thought from a small distance. To see it as a mental event, a product of a nervous system trying to protect you, rather than objective truth. Calm people have, often without ever being taught this explicitly, developed a diffused relationship with their own thought processes. They experience a difficult thought, and something in them recognizes, this is a thought. It is not necessarily accurate. It is not necessarily permanent. It is not necessarily who I am. This does not mean dismissing difficult thoughts. It means having a relationship with the inner life that includes a degree of perspective, an ability to watch the weather of the mind without being entirely at its mercy. You can develop this too, not through effort, but through the gentle, repeated practice of noticing. There is a thought happening, and thoughts are not facts. The third difference is how calm people relate to uncertainty. Most people have a very low tolerance for not knowing. And this low tolerance is itself the source of enormous suffering. Not the uncertain situation, but the frantic effort to escape the feeling of uncertainty. The compulsive information seeking, the obsessive planning, the need to have a definitive answer before one is available. Calm people tolerate uncertainty differently, not because they enjoy it, but because they have developed, at some level, a trust that they will be able to respond to what arrives. That they do not need to know the future in advance in order to handle it. Psychologists call this uncertainty tolerance, and it is learnable. The practice of sitting with not knowing, not solving it, not escaping it, just allowing the discomfort to exist without immediately acting on it, builds this tolerance gradually, through discovering again and again that the discomfort of not knowing does not destroy you, that you come through. The fourth difference is in how calm people talk to themselves. The internal monologue of a regulated person is not relentlessly positive. It is not a stream of affirmations. It is something quieter and more honest than that. A voice that tends toward accuracy rather than catastrophe. That responds to mistakes with, "That didn't go well. Let me understand why," rather than the full machinery of self-condemnation. That can hold the complexity of, "I am struggling with this, and I am also capable," and both things are true simultaneously. This is not self-deception. It is self-accuracy, and it makes an extraordinary difference to the emotional experience of being alive. The fifth difference, perhaps the most counterintuitive, is that calm people do not avoid difficult emotions. They move through them. There is a widespread and deeply unhelpful belief that emotional regulation means not being too emotional, that the regulated person keeps it together, presents composure regardless of what is happening internally. But that is not regulation. That is suppression. Genuine regulation is not the reduction of emotion. It is the ability to experience emotion fully without being overwhelmed by it, to feel anger without becoming anger, to feel grief without being submerged. Calm people cry. They get frustrated. They feel afraid. They just don't hand those feelings the steering wheel. They feel what is there, allow it to move through, because emotions, when not blocked, do move and return to equilibrium. Not because they forced themselves back, but because they didn't fight the feeling long enough to become stuck in it. What all of these qualities share is a single underlying orientation, a relationship with the inner life characterized by awareness rather than avoidance, by curiosity rather than combat, by the quiet, grounded willingness to be present with what is actually happening, rather than constantly managing or escaping it. This is not a distant achievement. It is a direction, a set of small, learnable movements toward a different way of inhabiting your own mind. Equanimity is not something you have. It is something you practice. And every moment of honest self-awareness, every time you notice a thought without becoming it, every time you sit with discomfort without immediately escaping, is the practice. Not perfectly, not always, but gradually, the way everything real is built, one honest moment at a time. Section 8. Rewiring the negative loop. What the research shows. Your brain is not fixed. This is not a motivational statement. It is a biological fact, established through decades of neuroscientific research, that has quietly rewritten our understanding of what the human mind is capable of across an entire lifetime. For most of the 20th century, the dominant assumption was that the brain reached structural completion sometime in early adulthood. The connections were made. The patterns were established. The person you were at 25 was more or less the person you would remain. This assumption turned out to be wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. What the research revealed is that the brain retains a capacity for structural change across the entire lifespan. New connections form. Existing connections strengthen or weaken depending on how frequently they are used. The brain you have today is not the brain you had 10 years ago, and the brain you have 10 years from now will be shaped in measurable ways by what you do with your attention between now and then. This is neuroplasticity, and it changes everything. The brain is composed of billions of neurons that communicate through connections called synapses. When two neurons fire together repeatedly, the connection between them strengthens. The signal travels more easily, more automatically. What was once effortful becomes habitual. What was once conscious becomes unconscious. The neuroscientist Donald Hebb captured this simply. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you think a thought, feel a feeling, engage in a behavior, you are reinforcing the neural pathway associated with that experience, making it slightly more automatic, slightly more default, slightly more likely to arise again. This is how habits form, how skills develop, how personality becomes personality. And it is also how negative patterns become entrenched. Every time the anxious thought arrives and is fused with, the anxiety pathway strengthens. Every time the self-critical voice speaks and is believed without question, that pathway deepens. Every time the loop runs uninterrupted, the loop becomes more automatic. You are not stuck in these patterns because you are weak. You are stuck because you have been practicing them, unknowingly, involuntarily, but consistently. But here is the other side of that same mechanism. Neurons that no longer fire together unwire. Pathways that are not reinforced weaken over time. The brain allocates its resources toward what is being used and away from what is not. This means that every time you interrupt a negative pattern, however imperfectly, however briefly, you are doing something real at the level of the brain. Introducing a moment of non-reinforcement into a pathway that has been reinforced thousands of times. Beginning, in the smallest but most genuine sense, to loosen its hold. And every time you practice a different response, a moment of diffusion instead of fusion, a beat of awareness before the reaction, you are beginning to build an alternative pathway. Not instantly, not dramatically, but measurably, cumulatively, in the direction of genuine change. There is something important to understand about how this process works. Intensity does not drive neuroplasticity. Consistency does. This matters enormously, because the dominant cultural narrative around change is one of dramatic transformation, the breakthrough moment, the single decision that changes everything. We are drawn to these stories. They suggest that change is available suddenly, completely, all at once. But the brain does not work that way. The brain responds to repetition, to small, consistent signals sent over time, to the accumulation of unremarkable moments in which a slightly different choice was made, a slightly different response was practiced. The grand gesture does not rewire the nervous system. The quiet daily practice does. This is actually good news, because it means you do not need a breakthrough. You do not need a transformative experience. You do not need to be fully ready before you begin. You just need to begin. Imperfectly, inconsistently at first, with full expectation of setback. Because setback is not failure. It is part of how the brain changes. Studies using brain imaging have shown measurable structural changes in people who practiced mindfulness for as little as 8 weeks. Changes in the prefrontal cortex, associated with emotional regulation and deliberate decision-making. Changes in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, which showed reduced density in people who practiced regularly. A less reactive amygdala means a nervous system less prone to treating ambiguous situations as threats, less likely to initiate the full stress cascade at the first hint of difficulty. These are not subjective reports of feeling better. These are structural changes in the physical architecture of the brain, produced not by medication, not by dramatic intervention, but by the repeated, patient practice of paying attention in a particular way. The brain you want is not far away. It is one layer beneath the one you are currently using. This also explains why certain patterns feel so stubborn, so immune to the insights you have already had about them. You may have understood, intellectually, for years, why you react the way you do. You may have traced the pattern back to its origin, explained it clearly, and yet the pattern continues. This happens because emotional memories are stored differently from intellectual understanding. Emotional memory lives in older, deeper structures of the brain, particularly the amygdala, and it does not update simply because you have acquired new intellectual understanding. It updates through experience, through the repeated lived experience of a different outcome, through the body encountering situations that used to trigger a certain response and discovering, again and again, slowly, that the expected threat did not materialize. This is why insight alone is rarely enough. Understanding why you are the way you are is valuable. It is the beginning of change, not the completion of it. The completion comes through practice, through the patient, imperfect act of responding differently, of sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it, of interrupting the loop, even briefly, even clumsily. It is working, even when it doesn't feel like it. Even on the days when you fall back completely, the attempt itself matters. The brain is keeping score even when you aren't. So let this settle. The patterns you are most exhausted by, the overthinking, the anxious loops, the self-critical voice, the chronic tension, these are not permanent features of who you are. They are well-practiced responses, practiced so many times for so long that they feel like personality, feel like nature, feel like the immovable architecture of your inner life. But they are not. They are habits of the nervous system. And habits change, not through force, not through shame, not through white-knuckling your way toward a better version of yourself, but through the quiet, consistent, compassionate practice of doing something slightly different. One moment at a time, one small interruption at a time. The mind you are tired of is not the mind you have to keep. And the mind you are moving toward is not as far away as it feels tonight. Section 9. The language inside your head. There is someone talking to you right now. Not me. Someone else. They have been talking to you all day. Before you opened your eyes this morning, they were already there. Running commentary on what you had to do, what you'd done wrong, whether you were keeping up, whether you were enough. They were there in the meeting, in the conversation, in the quiet moment when you caught your reflection and had a thought you'd never say out loud. They are there in the pauses. They are there in the transitions. And there is a reasonable chance you have never stopped to ask whether what they are saying is true. Psychologists call it the inner critic, the internal narrator, the self-talk loop. Whatever the name, the phenomenon is the same. The continuous, largely automatic stream of language that runs beneath conscious thought and shapes, with extraordinary precision, how you feel about yourself and the world you're moving through. This voice is not neutral. It has a tone, a vocabulary. A set of recurring themes it returns to with remarkable consistency. It catastrophizes, takes the specific and makes it total. One failure becomes always. One difficult day becomes this is just how my life is. It personalizes, takes the external and makes it about you. The project didn't land becomes I am not capable enough. The relationship ended becomes there is something fundamentally unlovable about me. It moralizes, converts neutral events into verdicts. Not, I forgot to respond, but I am the kind of person who lets people down. Not, that was a mistake, but I am a mistake. And it does all of this so quickly, so automatically, that most people never realize it is happening. The verdict arrives before the trial has even begun. You would never speak to a friend the way you speak to yourself at 3 in the morning. Sit with that for a moment. If someone you loved came to you in distress, frightened, ashamed, convinced they had failed, you would not respond the way your inner voice responds to you. You would not use that tone. You would not take the most uncharitable interpretation of their behavior and present it as objective truth. You would be kind, accurate, but kind. You would acknowledge the difficulty, offer perspective, remind them of what they were forgetting in their distress, their capability, their effort, their history of surviving difficult things. You would be a fair witness. The question is why you have never extended that same fairness to yourself. The inner critic is not, despite how it behaves, an enemy. This matters because the instinctive response is to silence it, argue with it, overpower it with affirmations. None of these work. The inner critic is not operating from malice. It is operating from fear. The voice that tells you that you are not enough, that you must stay vigilant, that you cannot afford to rest. That voice developed as a protective mechanism. It internalized the standards of early environments. It learned what was required to be acceptable, to be safe, to be loved. And it has been enforcing those standards ever since, with a dedication that is almost touching when you understand what it is actually trying to do. It is trying to protect you, badly, counterproductively, with tools that are no longer appropriate to your actual circumstances. But its intention is not cruelty. Its intention is safety. And when you understand that, when you can look at the harshest version of your inner critic and recognize it as a frightened part of you that learned to lead with judgment because judgment felt like control, something shifts. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a small, significant reduction in the war. The psychologist Kristen Neff has spent decades researching self-compassion. Her findings are consistent and, for many people, counterintuitive. Self-compassion does not produce complacency. This is the most common resistance. The belief that if you stop being hard on yourself, you will stop trying. That the inner critic is somehow responsible for your achievements. The research does not support this. What Neff found, consistently, is the opposite. People who practice genuine self-compassion show greater motivation, greater resilience, greater willingness to acknowledge mistakes and try again. Because shame is not a productive fuel. Shame produces avoidance. The desire to hide, to deny, to not try because not trying protects you from the evidence of failure. The person who is brutally self-critical does not become more capable. They become more defended, more brittle, more likely to give up when things get difficult because the cost of failure, measured in self-condemnation, is simply too high. Self-compassion makes failure survivable. And when failure is survivable, trying becomes possible. The inner critic is not the engine of your achievement. It is the weight you have been dragging behind you while you work. So what is the alternative? Not the inner cheerleader. Not the voice that insists everything is wonderful. That voice is not honest, and the part of you that values truth will never trust it. The alternative is the inner witness. The witness is not a critic and not a cheerleader. The witness is accurate. It sees what is actually happening, the difficulty, the mistake, the struggle, without amplifying it into catastrophe. It holds the full picture, including the context, including the effort, including the history of a person who has been trying, in difficult circumstances, with imperfect tools, to live as well as they can. The witness says, that was hard. That didn't go the way you wanted. Here is what you can learn from it. And here is what you are forgetting about yourself right now. The witness speaks with the voice you would use for someone you love. not because you deserve exemption from honest self-evaluation, because that is the voice that actually produces clarity, growth, and genuine psychological safety. The harshness you have been practicing, that is not honesty. It is anxiety dressed as standards, and you are allowed to put it down. The shift from inner critic to inner witness does not happen through suppression. You do not eliminate the critical voice by fighting it. You shift the relationship with it by noticing it. When the critical voice speaks, and it will, because this is a well-practiced pathway, the practice is not to argue, not to agree, not to perform a counter-affirmation. The practice is simply to notice. There's the critic. That is a thought produced by a part of me that learned to lead with judgment. It is not objective truth. It is not the full picture. And then, gently, without drama, ask, what would the witness say? What would I say to someone I loved, feeling exactly this right now? And say that instead. Not perfectly, not every time, but with increasing frequency, until the witness becomes a more practiced voice than the critic. The voice inside your head is not just commentary. It is the water you swim in, the emotional environment in which every experience is processed, every setback, every success, every quiet moment. All of it passes through the filter of that inner language before it becomes a feeling. Change the language, and you change the filter. Change the filter, and you change the emotional quality of your daily life. Not tomorrow, not after you've earned it, not once you've become the version of yourself that finally deserves kindness. Now, as you are, the voice that says you're not doing enough, you know the one. You've been listening to it for years. It has had more than enough airtime. It is time to practice a different voice. Not louder, not more insistent, just quieter, more honest, more fair. The voice of someone who is on your side, because that is what you have always deserved. And it was always, only, yours to give. Section 10. Small habits that calm the brain. You don't need a new routine, not another morning protocol, not a 16-step evening wind down, not a habit tracker you'll use for 11 days before life interrupts and it becomes another source of quiet self-judgment. You don't need more. You need to understand more precisely. To understand why certain small, ordinary actions produce a specific and measurable shift in your nervous system. Because when you understand the mechanism, you stop needing the motivation. The action makes sense. It has a logic. And a mind that understands why something works is far more likely to do it than a mind simply following instructions. So this is not a list of things to add to your day. This is an explanation of why certain things you may have already tried, may have dismissed as too simple to matter, are doing something real. Something your nervous system has been waiting for you to offer it. Let's begin with the breath. Not because it is profound, because it is immediate, and because most people have never been given a clear account of why it actually works. When you are anxious, you breathe differently, shallower, faster, higher in the chest. This is not a consequence of anxiety. It is a component of it. The sympathetic nervous system, when activated, changes your breathing pattern as part of the threat response. But the relationship between breath and nervous system is bidirectional. Just as activation changes the breath, changing the breath changes the activation. The vagus nerve, the primary highway of the parasympathetic system, is directly influenced by the rhythm and depth of your breathing. Slow, diaphragmatic breathing stimulates it. And vagal stimulation triggers a cascade of parasympathetic responses, reduced heart rate, decreased cortisol, a measurable shift away from sympathetic dominance and toward recovery. This is not relaxation as a feeling. This is relaxation as a physiological state change. A longer exhale than inhale is particularly effective. Breathing in for 4 counts, out for 6 or 8. The exhale specifically activates the parasympathetic response. So a breath pattern that emphasizes the out-breath is sending a very specific signal to the nervous system. The threat has passed. You can come down now. Your nervous system responds to signals, not intentions. You cannot intend your way to calm, but you can signal your way there. And the breath is the most direct signal available at any moment, in any circumstance, without equipment or preparation. The second thing is transitions. Most people move through their day in a continuous stream. One task bleeds into the next. One conversation immediately followed by another. No punctuation, no space between the paragraphs. And the nervous system carries the activation from each context forward into the next. You finish a difficult meeting and immediately open your inbox. You close the laptop and immediately engage with a domestic demand. The contexts change, but the activation accumulates, because there was never a moment in which the nervous system received the signal that one thing was complete before the next began. Intentional transitions change this. Not dramatically, not lengthily. A transition can be 30 seconds. A single conscious breath between hanging up the phone and beginning the next task. A moment of stillness, hands off the keyboard, eyes closed, one full exhale that says to the nervous system, that one is finished. This one is beginning. We are not carrying the weight of the last thing forward. The psychology of completion is powerful and underused. The brain responds to endings, to closed loops, to the felt sense that something is done. And a deliberate transition, however small, creates that closure. 30 seconds between things. A pause that says, that was then. This is now. The third thing is movement. Not as a health recommendation. You already know exercise is good for you. What is perhaps less understood is the specific psychological mechanism, and why even small amounts matter in ways that have nothing to do with fitness. The stress response prepares the body for physical action. Stress hormones are released, muscles are primed, energy is mobilized. For the nervous system to actually discharge this activation rather than simply carrying it forward, the body needs to do something physical. Not necessarily vigorous, not for long, but something. A walk, even a short one. The rhythmic, bilateral movement of walking, the alternating activation of left and right sides of the body, has a specific regulatory effect on the nervous system. This is why people instinctively pace when anxious. The body is trying to discharge what the stress response mobilized. Let it. A 10-minute walk after a stressful experience is not self-care as a luxury. It is completion of a physiological cycle that your nervous system needs in order to return to baseline. The fourth thing is closing open loops. The Zeigarnik effect, the way the mind holds active attention on unfinished business, applies not just to emotional loops, but to practical ones. Unfinished tasks, unanswered messages, decisions pending, things you said you would do and haven't yet. Each one is an open file. Each open file consumes a small but real portion of your available attention. Not because you are consciously thinking about it, but because the mind is quietly monitoring it, flagging it periodically to make sure you haven't forgotten. A surprisingly effective nervous system intervention is simply closing loops where you can. Not necessarily doing everything, but deciding about everything. The decision to do something, defer it consciously, or let it go entirely closes the file, removes it from active monitoring, reduces the background cognitive load that contributes, invisibly, to the experience of mental noise. This is why people often feel unexpected calm after clearing their inbox, or making a decision they have been avoiding, or finally responding to the message they've been carrying for days. It wasn't the task causing the tension. It was the open file. Close the file, and the tension releases. The fifth thing is rhythm. Specifically, consistency of timing. The nervous system is deeply responsive to predictability. Irregular sleep schedules, irregular meal times, irregular patterns of work and rest. These keep the nervous system in mild uncertainty. Not dramatically, but at the level of the body. Unpredictability is a form of low-grade stress. The system cannot fully settle because it doesn't know what comes next. Consistency sends a different signal. A regular time to stop working. A consistent morning and evening pattern. Meals that arrive at roughly predictable intervals. A bedtime the body begins to anticipate. These are not rigid rules. They are rhythms. And rhythm is one of the oldest signals of safety the nervous system knows. Long before language, before thought, there was rhythm. The rhythm of seasons, of day and night, of breath, of heartbeat. The nervous system evolved inside rhythm and responds to it at the deepest level. Creating small, consistent rhythms in your daily life is not boring. It is physiologically generous. None of these things are dramatic. That is precisely the point. Peace is not something you find at the end of a transformation. It is not waiting on the other side of sufficient self-improvement. Peace is something you stop interrupting. It is available in the exhale, in the 30-second pause between tasks, in the 10-minute walk you take not because you are disciplined, but because you finally understand what it is doing for you, in the decision that closes a loop that has been quietly open for weeks, in the bedtime your body begins, slowly, to trust. These small signals accumulate. They are not substitutes for the deeper work this audiobook has been building toward. They are the daily language through which that deeper work is expressed. The nervous system does not respond to grand gestures. It responds to what you do today, and tomorrow, and the day after that. Not perfectly, not without interruption, but consistently enough that the system begins, gradually, genuinely, to receive the message that rest is available. That calm is not something to be earned or achieved or waited for. That it is here, right now, in the next breath, if you are willing to take it. Section 11. Creating psychological safety inside yourself. The most unsettling kind of anxiety isn't about the world. It is about whether you can trust yourself to handle it. The fear beneath the fear. The layer underneath the specific worry. The unpaid bill. The unresolved relationship. The uncertain outcome. That is not really about any of those things. That is about something older and more fundamental. Whether you will be okay. Not whether the situation resolves favorably, but whether you, in the center of your own experience, will be able to hold yourself through whatever comes. Whether you are, at some basic level, a safe place to be. Most people have felt this. The sense that the ground beneath you is not entirely reliable. That in moments of real difficulty, something in you panics or shuts down, leaves you alone with the full weight of an experience you weren't sure you could carry. Psychologists call this a lack of internal secure base. And it is, quietly, the source of more anxiety than most people realize. Attachment theory describes how human beings develop their foundational sense of safety through early relationships. A child with a reliable, responsive caregiver develops an internalized conviction, not that nothing will go wrong, but that if things go wrong, they will be held. Over time, through repeated experience of being reliably held, the child develops the capacity to hold themselves. But not everyone receives that early experience. For those whose early environment was unpredictable or simply too overwhelmed to be consistently present, that internal anchor may not have formed solidly. And so in adulthood, under pressure, something in the nervous system looks outward for safety. Looks endlessly and exhaustingly for the external condition that will produce the internal feeling of being okay. Becoming your own secure base doesn't mean no longer needing other people. It means developing the capacity to be present with your own experience, including the difficult experience, without immediately fleeing it or collapsing into it. To say to yourself, in genuine difficulty, in real fear, I am here. I see this. I am not going to leave. Not, everything is fine. Just, I am here. That quiet refusal to abandon yourself in difficulty. That is the secure base, and it can be built, even now, even if it was not offered to you early. The most practical path is also the simplest. Keep small promises to yourself, not grand commitments. Small ones. I will take 10 minutes today that belong only to me. I will do the one thing I have been avoiding. I will stop when I said I would stop. Because here is what happens when you keep a promise to yourself, even a small one. You generate evidence. Evidence that the internal relationship, the one between you and you, is one in which commitments are honored, in which your own needs are taken seriously enough to act on. The nervous system is not persuaded by declarations. It is persuaded by data. Over time, this builds something that cannot be installed any other way. Self-trust, not confidence in outcomes, but the quiet conviction that whatever comes, you will be on your own side. That you will not add your own voice to whatever difficulty the world presents. You have been looking for safety in other people, other outcomes, other versions of yourself. But the ground you are looking for is already beneath you. You have been here through everything that has happened so far. Every hard thing you were sure you wouldn't survive, you survived. Every moment that seemed like it would never pass, passed. You have a longer track record of surviving your own life than your anxiety gives you credit for. The secure base you have been seeking is not somewhere else. It is here. It is you. It has always been you. You just needed, perhaps for the first time, to be still enough to feel it. Section 12. You don't have to earn rest. Somewhere along the way, you learned that rest was something you had to earn. You may not remember when, but the belief arrived quietly and took up residence so deeply that it stopped feeling like a belief. It started feeling like a fact. Rest comes after the work is finished. Calm arrives when the problems are solved. You are allowed to stop when the list is cleared and the obligations are met, and there is nothing left that requires your attention. But the list is never fully cleared. The work expands to fill whatever space you create by finishing the previous work. And so the permission to rest, the feeling that you have finally done enough to deserve stillness, never quite arrives. There is always one more thing. And so you keep going. Not because you want to, but because stopping feels wrong. Because rest without earning it carries a specific, uncomfortable flavor of guilt. You have been waiting for a permission slip that was never coming. The belief that rest must be earned has a cultural architecture. For much of the industrialized world, the value of a person has been measured in their productivity. Work is virtue. Busyness is proof of worth. And rest, real rest, unscheduled and unhurried, is available only to the finished, the successful, the sufficiently productive. The problem is that this framework was not designed for human well-being. It was designed for output. And you are not an output. You are a person, a nervous system, a consciousness moving through a life that is unrepeatable and finite and happening right now, regardless of whether the inbox is empty or the goals are met. The life is not later. The life is now. Genuine rest is not the absence of activity. It is the presence of restoration. The nervous system genuinely downregulating. The body releasing held tension. The mind moving from narrow, task-focused doing into the wider, softer awareness of simply being. Something in you, something that has been braced and performing and managing, finally, actually letting go. This kind of rest feels different from exhaustion. It has a quality of aliveness to it, of quiet richness, of being present in your own experience in a way that feels, when you find it, like arriving somewhere you have been trying to reach for a long time. You may not have felt it in a while, but it is not gone. It was available this whole time. This audiobook has covered a great deal of ground. We talked about the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, and why the exhaustion you carry is not a personal failure, but the predictable result of a system never designed for this level of demand. We talked about why your mind never feels quiet, and what is actually happening when silence feels uncomfortable. We talked about the overthinking loop, why you cannot simply stop, and why the loop is a messenger, not an enemy. We talked about emotional exhaustion, its flatness, its disguises, its particular cruelty of becoming invisible because it is so familiar. We talked about the nervous system, the window of tolerance, the way the body holds what the mind hasn't processed, and the specific signals that begin to shift activation back toward rest. We talked about positive psychology in its honest form, not forced optimism, but the grounded understanding that genuine flourishing includes difficulty and honesty and the full range of human experience. We talked about how calm people think, not because they feel less, but because they have developed a different relationship with what they feel. We talked about neuroplasticity, the extraordinary truth that the brain you have today is not the brain you have to keep. We talked about the language inside your head, the inner critic as a frightened protector, and the inner witness as the more accurate, more useful alternative. We talked about small habits, not as discipline, but as signals. The exhale, the transition, the movement, the rhythm that tells the nervous system it is safe to settle. And we talked about psychological safety, the secure base, the self-trust, the quiet internal presence that says I am here, whatever comes. All of it has been pointing here, to this simple, quietly revolutionary act of allowing yourself to rest. Not earning it, not scheduling it strategically. Rest is what a human life requires. Rest is what you require. There will still be hard days after this. Nights when the thoughts spiral anyway. Moments of exhaustion that arrive without warning. Days when the inner critic speaks louder than the witness. This is not failure. This is being human. The goal was never to transcend difficulty. The goal, the real one, is to develop a different relationship with it. To move through struggle with more grace, more self-compassion, more understanding of what is happening and why. To come back to equilibrium more readily. To know, with increasing certainty and decreasing effort, the way back to yourself. Not a destination, a capacity. You are going to be okay. Not because everything will work out perfectly, but because you are more capable than your hardest moments have told you. Because the ground beneath you is more solid than the anxiety suggests. The calmer, quieter, more settled version of yourself. That is not a future version. It is this version. Learning, practicing, getting it wrong and trying again. Moving, imperfectly but genuinely, in the direction of a different way of being. You have been doing that all along. You were doing it just by listening to this. You do not have to earn stillness. You do not have to finish first. You do not have to become a better version of yourself before you are allowed to rest in the one you already are. Your mind has done enough for today. Your body has carried enough. You are allowed to put it down now. Right now, in this moment, in this quiet, you are allowed to arrive. To stop moving towards something and simply be here. Calm is not the end of something. It is the beginning of how you were always meant to feel. And it is here. It has always been here. Waiting, patiently, underneath everything you have been carrying. Waiting for you to finally, gently, set it down. If no one has told you this lately, you are allowed to rest. Right now, as you are, you have always been allowed.